Good afternoon. My name is Jay Rothman, and welcome to Real People, Real Stories, Raw. This afternoon, I am excited to have in the studio with me not only an author, not only a beautiful soul, a beautiful woman, but a friend of mine that I believe we've known each other for right around 8 years or so. And her name is Mary Hill. Mary Hill, welcome to the studio today.
Hi, Jay. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. You and I, this show is long overdue. We had talked about having you come in the studio now for some time, and it's been many, many months, and we just never, our schedules never aligned. But here we are today, and I'm so excited to have you in the studio because you have a story unlike any other guest that I've had step into the studio to have this conversation. And so I'm excited about it because you have a story that is unique and beautiful, and it involves your willingness to step into people's lives as they were in the middle of, let's say, dying in this universe, in this lifetime, and transitioning. And so I thank you for joining me. I do want to say this, is that at any time, if I should ask you a question that should come up that you're not ready or uncomfortable answering, you could set a loving boundary with me, and I will respect you for that, and we'll just move on. And so, by the way, I neglected to acknowledge that not only when you were in your career, you were a hospice nurse, but you also got trained as a Reiki master as well as a shamanic healer. So you were more than just a hospice nurse, of course. And what I'd like to do is invite you to share really a little bit about your backstory, how you got into that business. And as we navigate through the conversation, we'll definitely get into the book that you have published. It's called Messages from the Afterlife, Memoirs of a Hospice Nurse. And I've spent some time deep diving into the book, read a number of the stories. And what struck me most about your experience as a hospice nurse was that I never took the time to think about how your job, your responsibilities, obviously you were paid to do a job to take care of people at the end of their life, but I never really gave thought to how your experience with them impacted you in that moment, in that day, in that week, in that month. And how difficult it had to have been to get an attachment to people, to connect with people as they were at the end of their life, and what impact that had on you, your family, your husband, and wow, it just gave me a whole nother level. I earned a whole nother level of respect for you, Mary, because I never really had given it any thought before. I never understood I never took the time to understand what goes into being a hospice nurse. And so thank you so much for being here today. And I'm excited for you to begin sharing some of your journey.
Wow, thank you. Wow, where do I start? Okay, a little bit of backstory. Well, I was the oldest of 5 kids, so I naturally fell into a caregiver role. The youngest was 15, and me being the oldest. So I was like mom's, helper. And so I think I was always a giver, and nursing just really appealed to me. I can remember going to the college advisor, and it was kind of like contemplating being a like marriage family counselor or a nurse. And she basically said, it'll take you less time to be a nurse. You'll have a lot more variety. You can do different things, and you'll make more money. So it's like, okay, sign me up. So that's where it started. And I see it as a true calling for me. And I think one of the benefits, and there were so many benefits, but I think one of the biggest ones was that I really knew I made a difference. I could tell. I was told so many times. And, I also got a lot of accolades from being a hospice nurse, but it was more than that for me. It was I guess it was just a true calling. And I loved the fact that we could keep patients comfortable. We could get morphine without any trouble. We didn't have to go through triplicates. We didn't have to, go through, you know, um, the typical Western medicine, although it is Western medicine and just the best part of Western medicine for me, because I don't know how people go through this without hospice because of the support that they get from like all the team members. It's not only the nurse, we have the social worker, a bath aide, a spiritual counselor, the doctor that comes in. Both of my parents had hospice because of me, because I initiated it. And that's one of the messages I want to get out there to people is that, they can get the ball going as far as a loved one who may be declining, but they're not really sure. Because I think the real tragedy that I always saw in my career was that people got on hospice too late. And I had so many people say to me, gosh, I wish I knew about this sooner because we could have benefited. And so I think it's just so difficult for people to talk about end of life, especially with their loved ones. And then they're shy about bringing it up, and the patient's shy about bringing up this topic. And so it's like a pink elephant in the room that, nobody really wants to talk about. And so I don't know. And I guess there's reluctance too on maybe the doctor's part of like, is the patient really 6 months from death? Basically is what hospice is. And, we don't really know. None of us know. And then, so the hospice role has to be to recertify the patient so that, that they do qualify to be on. So, so let's get back to more questions.
No, that was beautiful. I appreciate you. I want to thank you and acknowledge you for sharing some of your, touching on your backstory, being the oldest in your family, and you took on somewhat of a caregiving role. Now, whether or not that was asked of you or assigned to you, or you just, it just became part of your birth order rituals and rites. Mm-hmm. It kind of gave you the training wheels for your future career, unknowingly.
Yeah, for sure.
So that actually probably helped you as you navigated into your role as a caregiver in that setting. There were so many parts to the story, to your book, that just touched me in such a profound way. One of them was that I know that when doctors go to medical school, part of their education they're taught is how not to take a personal vested interest in the patient's story, or in the patient's in the relationship with the patient. They're basically taught and trained and how important it is to really have that, almost like that barrier, that boundary between them and the patient, so that they don't have to go through a grieving process when and if a patient should pass away. What struck me was that not only did you show up with love and kindness in your heart for each patient, but you took it much further. And on one hand, it was an incredible gift that not only did you give to the patient that was on his or her last days, but you also connected with the family members in a very profound way. Tell me more about that.
Wow. Yeah, I love the families, and I love being a teacher. And so much of my role was about teaching families, how to give morphine, the signs and symptoms, and just being a support for them. I was so welcomed in the homes, and I would always give my patient a hug and sometimes a kiss on the forehead when I greeted them, and then when I said goodbye, and the families too, when I got close enough, I would give them hugs. And I'm just a hugger, so but the families, there were so many beautiful stories, and I was not the type to run out the door, take the bottles and do the minimum. I loved the connection I was making with these patients and their families. And there were so many cool people that I met, and I really admired the family caregivers that were there day and night. You know, I really just think that is such a hard job. You know, my job was, I was at their home for an hour, but then I got to go home to my cats and my husband and my ocean, and that's how I balance things. But you know, the families were so in need, and the support and the love that they got from hospice was really made a difference for them, because you know, it's so scary to take care of somebody that's dying and somebody that you love, and it's all the emotions that you go through, the pre-grieving, and so it was just such a wonderful thing to put myself out there in love, you know, and yeah, you know, yeah, there's a lot of tears. I cried many tears over patients, you know, and sometimes I wondered, how do I do this? I don't know if I could do this. I can remember one time the supervisor came out with me, and it was a very sweet patient. I just loved her. And she said to me, God, Mary, she says, you really did a great job, but I don't know how you do this. And I said, I don't know how I do it either, you know, but I think it's a God thing. I think God just works through us, you know, in all different ways. And I think this was my destiny, my chosen path. And I loved what I did. You know, I mean, there were times it's, you know, it's not fun being on call and having to work holidays or weekends, and the paperwork can be, you know, yucky, but, you know, it's all part of it, you know, and so I felt very fortunate. And having Mondays off was a huge thing for me. Just having time to be at the ocean, and I would get together with my two girlfriends, and they were kind of like my therapy. So they went through this whole hospice thing with me, because for 20 years we met every Monday night. So
Wow.
yeah, it was
That's
really
what you call a commitment to a relationship.
yes. Yes. It was, I felt very blessed. Yeah. My
Hmm.
girlfriend lived at Laguna. And so we were able to sit on the deck and look at the ocean while we were having some wine and some appetizers. It was really, really good. And I knew someday it would end. And my friend moved to England, and she since died. But, you know, that's life, you know, it changes. And yeah. So,
One of the things that I learned about, there's a number of things I learned about you, even though we've been friends for 8 years, and we've spent many intimate moments together in the same rooms and along the same ocean shore at the Pacific Ocean in Huntington Beach and Sunset Beach. However, what I didn't know was that how much you had feared dying. But that came through very clearly in the book. And I'd like to invite you to share a little bit about how it was, and if that's changed for you today from having lived this experience, being there by the side of so many patients that passed while under your care.
yeah, I'm going to pull this over. Let's see if that's on. You know, that's a really good question, because yeah, I definitely did have fear about dying. I think everybody does. And I think by working in this field and watching it happen, and there's nothing like being there, you know, it's like you can't get it from a book. And just seeing that one patient of mine actually die in front of me, and that was such a beautiful experience. Her name was Knock. And so would you like me to talk a little bit about her?
Of course, I'd love to hear.
Okay. Well, she was Vietnamese, and she was the mother of like 14 kids. And she didn't speak a word of English, but I just felt a real connection to her. And I used to hug her and give her a kiss every time I saw her. And she loved my visits. And so it was a Friday, and I got a real strong feeling to give the family a call and go visit her. And they're like, oh, I think she's okay. You know, you could wait till next week. And I'm like, nah, I think I'll swing by. Well, when I got there, I could see that she was transitioning, like her death was really close. And I don't know if I told you, she had 14 kids, and
Mhm.
8 of them were girls, and
Mm.
most of them were in the house. And yeah, we used to have lots of fun together, you know, and just socializing. But so yeah, when I got there, she was breathing differently, and I knew her time was close. And prior to this, her husband was really grieving over losing his wife, and asked me if he could go with her. He wanted to die with her. And it was just so touching. I would just started crying. And, I had explained to him that if there was something that could be done, it would have been done, at the hospital, because he was like, can she go back to the hospital? So that was one thing that happened. And then another thing was my patient wanted to have a baby doll. And so the daughters didn't know what was going on with her. And so I said, just get her the baby doll. I think it's her way of processing it. So they bought her the baby doll, and she was holding the baby and said, oh, we have to prepare for a funeral because the baby's dying. And I think it was her way of just coming to terms with her own death. And so that was really interesting to watch. I never saw that before. And patients have all different ways of coming to terms with their death. So, or their transition. Sometimes the word death doesn't really ring a bell for me. So anyway, transition is a better word. So anyway, I was in the room with her, and I was not getting a blood pressure, and that's a real sign. And all of a sudden, it just turned magical in the room. It was like I felt the presence of angels all around. I was looking into her eyes, and her face became luminous. It was just beautiful. She was like filled with this joy and peace and serenity, and just this look of amazement. And it was this soul to soul contact that I had with her, was I was looking at her eyes, and she took her last breath while I held her hands. And I was just like, whoa, I can't believe this just happened, And, I just sat there with her for a while. And then I went into the kitchen and told the girls their mom had passed. And then everybody started crying. And they came into the room, and they wanted me to check for her heartbeat. And I did what I needed to do. But she was really, really special. And, I can remember, because I was the nurse on call that day, that I had to go see this patient at like Friday at around 8:00 at night. And I was just not happy about the fact that I had to go do this visit. And she was my patient. And so the admission visit is a long, lengthy thing. And, but the family was so cool, and we just had a fun time together. I got to know everyone. So that was really neat that I got to put the patient on, and then she became my patient. Because typically with hospice, there's an admission nurse, and I actually filled that role for a year or two. And so that's the first nurse that goes to the home and gets all the information and kind of sets the stage. And so, yeah, that was a beautiful, beautiful memory,
Why was her story one of the ones that stood out to you as one of your favorite? What made your experience with her differently than some of the others?
I think because I was there at the moment of her death, and I felt the grace. I felt the energy, I felt God actually there. Yeah, and the beauty of dying and the joy. I think that was it for me. Because certainly there were so many other stories, and each story is different just depending on, what I happened to write in my journal. Because I had been a case manager for 4 years, and then I wanted to change. So I got into the sales force, and then the admission nurse, and then I was really missing the contact with patients. So I went back to being a case manager. And that's when all these amazing stories and patients, these patients came on my service, and I was just like, wow, it was so cool. And so I guess I was always a writer, because I would write these things down, but these stories. And so that's kind of how it all came about.
Did you have the sense that in her last moments that she was at peace with her passing, or was she fighting it?
I would say she was definitely at peace. Yeah.
And so that's the energy that you were feeding off of. It was just that intimate connection as she was transitioning. because she was at peace, it felt really comforting for you, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
As you shared this story, I'm curious to know, um, as you shared it in this moment, do you have any sense or presence of her being here with you right now?
Yeah, actually I do. Yeah. Yeah, I feel her. Yeah, it's interesting because I once heard that all you have to do is think of a loved one and they're there, you know? And I've seen that over and over in my life. And yeah, I definitely feel her.
I ask because I see a glow on your face right now,
Oh,
even though you pulled the curtains forward to reduce some of the back sun glare coming in from Southern California. But your face is glowing right now,
no.
and you're radiating. And so I just wanted to bring that to your attention. It's a beautiful moment.
Oh, thank you.
I'd like for you to also share a little bit about the backstory. One of the stories, I think his name was Dennis, and 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 how your book cover, I think, was born out of your experience with Dennis in the afterlife. Is that correct?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, okay. So well, can I show my book? So
Absolutely.
yeah, this is the cover and there's the butterfly. So the original title of my book was going to be called Butterfly Kisses because of Dennis. So the story of Dennis, he had a great family. I loved his family. So he had died on a Saturday night, and I used to do Reiki on him. He was just really a fighter and really cool guy, really wonderful family. So so the next day I went to the park, and we have a central park that's close by, and probably had a book to read, and I was just kind of wanting to be alone and just kind of like integrate the fact that he was gone, and grieve, my own tears. And so all of a sudden there was this butterfly that was, flying around my head, and I had this immediate thought, hey, Dennis, is this you? I thought it was Dennis. And I said, okay, if it's you, then I want you to land on my hand. So the butterfly flew a little bit and then came by and brushed against my forehead and then landed on my hand. And I was just like, oh my God, it was just like the longest time. And at that moment, I said, I'm going to write a book. I got to let people know that this happened. Although I had really thought about writing a book back in 1997 when I first wrote my first story about Jeff, but that's another tangent. But so then, so that had happened. And then when I had my massage appointment the next day, I was telling my massage therapist about the story. And she said, oh, and she had her hands on my back and she said, oh my God, Mary, she says, tell me the name of that patient again. And I said, Dennis. And she says, well, he's here right now. And you two had a soul agreement that you would be here to assist him and his family when it was his time to cross over. And that, and he wanted to say thank you for what you meant to him, because you helped him so much. And it was like, whoa. And so then a few days later, they had the service for him. So I went to the service and I'm telling the people at my table what had happened. And the one woman said, oh, you know what? I have a similar story about Dennis. She said, he came back as a bird. She says, there was this bird that kept pecking at our patio door and we were trying to shoo him away and shoo him away. He kept coming back until we realized that it was Dennis. And I guess the husband ran upstairs to get the camera and he took a picture of the bird. And then that bird was transposed on Dennis's hand. There was a picture. So, so yeah, Dennis was a really great guy. And the family was really grateful for the Reiki because it really made a difference. Reiki does, it's so beneficial for pain management, anxiety, just everything. And so I was really glad that I was able to do Reiki. And I never talked about it with hospice because I thought, for one thing, how am I going to chart that? You can't get a care plan for Reiki. And so I just left it out of my notes, of course. And so one day I decided to open up this throat chakra and speak my truth at a meeting. The doctor was there, all the nurses. And I said, hey, I want to tell you guys that I've been doing Reiki on patients. And the one supervisor said, oh, is that some kind of artwork? And I said,
Oh my
no, it's it's so funny. She says, no. I said, no, it's spiritual energy and it really helps with pain and all that. And we're like, oh, wow, that's cool. And then it was like, they went on to something else. So it was like all those fears about,
Wow. Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
something.
We create a story. We create that mountain out of a molehill.
Yes.
And then we keep repeating it every day because we repeat 90% of the thoughts from yesterday, keep repeating like Groundhog's Day. And so we make a big deal out of something that sometimes is just for ourselves. It just becomes way bigger than it needs to be. I was going to ask you about that. What is the typical responsibility of a hospice nurse? Because when you shared in a book about, doing Reiki on patients and some of the other things that you have done, it goes above and beyond what the call of duty is and what the responsibility is that you were paid for.
Yeah.
Did you find that because you went above and beyond, was there any, let's say, inner conflict or competitive, let's say, dysfunction between yourself and your associates or other hospice nurses that were maybe aware of what you did, that you went above and beyond?
Yeah. Let's see. There was one that was, she had definitely different views than me. But nobody really gave me a hard time about it. And I actually offered free Reiki to my coworkers. And then there was also a time where the hospice volunteer coordinator, she let me do an in-service on Reiki. So I was able to do this in-service and mostly to the volunteers, because volunteers definitely can do, well, they can do almost anything, I guess. I don't know. Well, within their scope. Okay. So, so that was really cool. And this one particular girl who I thought was opposed to me, she showed up at my in-service. So, so again, just like you said, it's all about the thoughts that we have that keep repeating and they have no valid,
Well, they become valid because they become our reality. If we think about it day after day, our thoughts become our reality. And so it takes a lot of practice to learn how to turn off the thoughts that are actually not serving us and potentially hurting us. But that's another discussion for another show. What comes to mind right now for me is I'd like for you to share what was the most difficult case that you had to work within. What was that case and why was that one so difficult for you?
Well, the first one that came to my mind was Walt. And he was in his 20s. And I had a hard time getting to him. He was really closed off. And oh, yeah, I remember I really felt for him because his friends were going to come to see him one day. And he was all excited and he was all getting all prepared. And they ended up canceling on him. And I saw his disappointment because I think I made a visit the next day or something. And but I really felt for this guy. I forget what kind of cancer. I think it was testicular cancer. Well, it was some kind of cancer. And yeah, I had gotten a call from the stepmom, and she had called me and said, "Oh, he's choking and he's calling out for help." And so I instructed her to give him the morphine because that always helps with any anxiety or pain or even shortness of breath. It's really amazing medication. It's concentrated morphine, Roxanol. So anyway, she did that, and I said, I'm going to be right over. And so when I went to the home, he was already gone. And I told her that he was gone. And then the dad, she called the dad. And so then he came over and, you know, was there with the son. And oh my gosh, just the pain. It's, you know, it's one thing when somebody dies in their 80s or 90s or even 70s, but when they die at young ages, man, it just tears me up. And so those young people were really tough for me. And that's why I knew I could never do pediatric hospice. You know, the 21 was our cutoff point, you know, to accept people. And, you know, I think looking back to those cases that were hard to get the pain under control was real tough for me, because as good as morphine was, you know, sometimes we couldn't get the pain totally controlled. You know, maybe we would get it down to a 2 or 3, but at least that's manageable. But so those were tough ones. Loretta was a tough one too. She was something else. Oh my gosh. She was, so in the book, she was losing her mind, and she was having a real tough time with making her transition, and just fighting it. And one day she was, I don't know if I was on call that day or heard about it later, but she went screaming out of the house in her nightgown that her husband is killing her. And oh my God, it was, and so we eventually had to put her in a nursing home, and which was a great relief for the family. And I spent lots of hours at the nursing home, and we told them, hey, she's a runner. Well, they didn't believe us. So first night out, she was out the door of the nursing home. Thank God she had her badge, and they found her and brought her back to the nursing home. And, you know, I sat with them because she was on crisis care. So there's different levels of hospice. So crisis care is like, or continuous care, when a patient needs around the clock care. And it's when they're really, really close to making their transition. So yeah, she was a tough one. And she had a lot of unsolved stuff, emotional stuff. And I used to see that too with patients. It's like they need to clean up their side of the street, you know, and if they don't get the courage to talk about these things, it plays on them, you know, it makes dying harder. So I saw that a lot.
You know, it's interesting you share that. That's such a powerful statement. But I'm also thinking about the other side. I've actually recently had the honor to work with a woman, to coach a woman locally, and you know, one of the things she shared was that as her mom was dying, she was still waiting for her mom to say those things that she had waited her lifetime to hear her mom say. And she never heard it. Her mom passed, and her mom didn't have it, wasn't ready to put closure on things that hadn't gone so well. And so, you know, that there's the other side of it, is when a family member is standing or sitting by the bed of their loved one, and they're waiting to hear the words that they perhaps waited decades, their whole life, to hear from a parent. And then they got to take that with them for their, you know, for whatever days they have left, either living in acceptance or not accepting that they didn't hear what they needed to hear from their own parent, perhaps a mom or a dad. So it works. It goes on both sides, you know, both family members are impacted when someone is in those dying days, and they're not prepared to say some things maybe that can put some closure on the relationship.
Yeah, that's a really powerful thing, you know. And you know, sometimes our parents just aren't capable of being the parent we wanted them to be, and they didn't get the love that they needed, so they didn't know how to show it. And you know, a lot of healing occurs on the other side. I had a reading from a dear friend of mine who's an amazing medium. And she channeled my dad and said that one of his biggest regrets was he didn't tell us how much he loved us when he was on the earth plane, and how he was so proud of me and how much he loved me. And so we can still communicate with them. Sometimes it's obviously a little bit more challenging, but yeah, it's really a good point. And it just reminds me how so many of us are closed off, and how we need to say those important words. When my dad was dying, I was really lucky that I got to get there before he made his transition. And when I saw him, I whispered in his ear, "All is forgiven." And because I didn't know if he was holding on to something, because my psychic friend told me that he was, and so I just wanted to free him of that, and told him, of course, that I loved him. And actually, my dad was telling us that he loved us, and I would say it to my dad, and I didn't hear it back, and I didn't hear it back, and then one day I heard it, and then he continued saying it to us. So he did have the capacity, but our parents went through such rough times. My parents were in the Depression era, and they lived through some tough times, and people give what they can, and I think that we just need to accept, our parents for who they are, and to love them. To me, love is the answer for everything. And if we can show up as love and be there in a loving place for our loved ones, and the world would be so much better. We could just learn to love one another and know we are all connected. We're all one. What we do to one affects us. We're all part of that one. And, it really disturbs me to see the wars and the craziness that's going on. And when we just need to embrace each other and just care for one another, and realize that this life is just so temporary. And it's like the love that we give to others and the difference we make in other people's lives, that's what it's all about.
Amen. Amen, sister. You got that right. I wore this shirt today to honor you.
Oh, thank you.
I haven't worn this one in a while. I've got a few up my sleeve. No pun intended, all pun intended. But I put this one on today because I know how when you showed up as a hospice nurse, you always came from love with no conditions. You just showed up as your authentic self with love and kindness. And I noticed that in the last couple of months, there's been a connection between you and my mom, who is a fan and a friend, and of course, my mom in the social media community that I'm part of today. There is a saying that you say. Could you share that with the community right now?
Love never dies.
What does that mean for you?
Well, what it means is that we are love, and love is the only thing that's real, and love is eternal, and love is God. And so I see God as love. I came from a Greek Orthodox, and I just didn't resonate with me, but I have found God through 12-step program and through spirituality. And I think I've always been a seeker. But yeah, to me, that the only thing that is real is love. And it's love and fear. So it's the two opposites. So fear is about war and greed and all the horrible things that are happening because we're away from God, which is away from love. And so, love is eternal, and I think that the love that we have for our loved ones continues on after they cross over. That love is always there, and we bring them to our memory, and they're there. I really feel my mom, my dad, not all the time, obviously, but certainly I've felt them a lot, and it's been.
How do you do that? I ask you that because I've had a lot of people that have said to me that I've worked with over the last couple of years that say, I I think even my mom has said that to me. I don't know that I've ever felt Dad's presence since he's passed. And you and I chatted a little bit about this before the show, and I'd like you to touch on that a little bit. How can you initiate connecting with a loved one that's transitioned to the other side?
Wow, that's a good question. I think for me, it's a feeling that I get. I sense their presence. It's kind of hard to describe it. It's kind of like it's an energy, that's just there. And anybody could do it. It's just being open to it. And of course, there are mediums that can talk to the other side. And I do have a great friend, Sherry, who's able to do it for me. And she's in my book a lot. And she's done it for me. And so, I would say to her, sometimes I get this feeling and I hear these messages and I wonder if I'm just making it up. And she says, no, Mary, she says, I had the same thing happening to me. And she says, and I realized that it is true, what I'm feeling, and just trust it. So, there's always that skeptical part of me that comes into play, but I've learned to just trust it and know that, I can't prove it. It's just something that I believe in. And I think it's belief actually that just connects you to your loved ones and to know that they're still around because they want to be around us, I believe.
I like how you just described it as you believe. Part of it is you have to believe. Mm-hmm. And what that means to me, if I may paraphrase you, is that if you're open and willing to accept the idea that you can connect, you can actually have a connection, a relationship with a loved one that's passed or a friend, you just have to be open to receive it. And when you open your heart and you open your heart space to receiving, then all those miracles can, in fact, take place. And perhaps they are taking place, but you're just not aware of it because you got a closed heart and mind to it, thinking that it's not possible. You're just missing a signpost.
Yes, I agree. And too, I think because I do Kundalini yoga and most days I do my daily spiritual practice, I think being connected to God is also has helped me to be more intuitive and be more open and more open channel to hearing voices from the other side and getting those messages. So I think it all comes to play, especially, taking Reiki and going through all the levels. And each time you take Reiki, there's different higher vibration. And the shamanic practice that I did for a year, the training, I think all those things, when you work on your spirituality and you work on closeness to God, that's when I think you're more open.
Thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful. I was just thinking also about in the book how you shared how many funerals you went to. Again, I don't know how many hospice nurses take that much of a vested interest in their patient and the family members that they don't just, when they clock out, they're done. You never clocked out. You didn't clock out with so many of your patients. You actually went in. You went in all the way. Even after they had passed, you showed up for them and their family members. You attended multiple funerals. And for me, the takeaway that I got from your book is that the hope is that when we think about hospice without really having gone through it, if we haven't gone through it in our own life, we have our own stories that we think of what it's going to be like or what it could be like to be with a family member or when the time comes for ourselves. And we go right to the negative thought of what that all means. Whereas what you bring, your book, the stories within the book, which is so beautifully written, brings another perspective, contrast to the experience, which is that it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. It can, in fact, be an absolutely beautiful time for family members and for the loved one who is about to transition, to make it an absolutely loving, beautiful experience. It doesn't have to be what we think it may in fact turn out to be.
Yeah, you're so right. It can be a beautiful experience. And it's really an honor and privilege to be there to help somebody transition, and just the love and support. And, sometimes patients wait until the family is out of the room to leave. So, because I went through my own grief about not being there for my mom when she died, and the timing just wasn't right. I had a flight scheduled and she died 2 days before. I was in Kundalini yoga teacher training at the time. And yeah, I was kind of lost my train of thought there about, but oh yeah, I know what I was going to say. So what happened was my mom left her body when my sister and my dad left the room. They were there with her almost constantly, and they happened to leave the room for whatever reason. And I think what happens sometimes is that the soul doesn't want to leave when their family is there. It's like the energy of their family members keeps them in the earth plane because they're reluctant to leave. They just, I think they feel the resistance of their family members. So when the family's out of the room, then they feel free to leave. And I've seen that over and over again. And obviously it doesn't happen to every single case, but it's been kind of an interesting phenomena for me to witness.
From your experience of having done this work for many, many years and having the experiences that you were open to receive and be part of, what is the biggest takeaway for you? What was the number one thing that you learned from your experience?
That there is no death.
Tell me more.
That it's life is, the soul is who we are, and the soul lives on, and we come to the earth plane when we decide to. I think we have a choice. And a lot of this stuff I've learned from Kundalini yoga, because through teacher training, we talked a lot about death and dying and the soul and what happens. And so, we were taught that we live like 8 million lifetimes we've had. And so it's interesting. And, to hear my mother, her messages after she died, and just so many of the patients that came back to me, it's like, there's just no doubt in my mind. And look at all the books out there. That one of the ones that I think about, this neuroscience, well, he was a doctor, neurologist, I think, and he had a death experience, and can't remember the name of the book, but I read the book. It was an amazing account of near death. And my good friend Mary, she had a death, well, she calls it a near love experience. So her story is amazing. So, there's no doubt in my mind, because I think that there's a reason for these individuals who have come back from the other side, near death. I'm fascinated by this subject, of patients that, were on the operating table and they left their bodies and they were looking down and could tell what was said, while they were out of their bodies. And so many of those things that I've seen and witnessed through my life just leads me to believe that there is definitely something more, and it's better. It's actually better. I can remember once hearing somebody say to me that death is the best thing that could happen to us. And it was like, whoa. And, the joy. And I have another friend who wrote a book about her daughter's death, and that she was communicating with her back and forth, So there's so many stories out there, and it's like, how could you not believe, at least in my mind. And one of my favorites was, I'm not going to be able to think of his name now, but he was a psychologist, and he had these clients, and he would put them under hypnosis. And they would talk about their past lives. And so I know that we come back over and over. And I heard too that we come back as soul bodies, you know, like we're in groups, and that we also are choosing, you know, certain people.
In other words, what families to be born into?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And
Mhm.
also, I learned this thing, it's called hookum, and it's like 80% of your life is called hookum, which means that you have no choice over these things. I mean, it's part of our destiny. And like the other 20% is our free will. So that was an interesting takeaway that I had, and thought about that a lot, you know, because I do believe that we choose our parents, and that we choose, well, you know, the circumstances that come into our life. And I mean, even writing this book was like, wow, I don't know if I want to do this, and the work involved and money involved, and just facing my fears so much. Oh, the hardest thing I ever had to do was hit that send button to get my manuscript out there to Balboa. I was like, whoa. But, you know, here I am now. I had no idea that I would be doing this, but I love doing it, you know, and I think that there's a need for it. I think people have a need to talk about it. And when I do my book signings, I like to have an open forum, so it gives other people the chance to talk about their hospice experience, or maybe losing somebody that they loved. And I find that very gratifying, because I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about others. And if I could be a source of information for them or support, I'm more than happy to do that.
So you mentioned the book tour. I've been watching you. I've been following you. I know you've been doing a lot of Barnes and Nobles and some of the local mom and pop bookstores, regionally speaking. I saw that just a week or two ago. You were in Huntington Beach at the Barnes and Nobles, right next door to where I spent the first part of my healing journey. And you did a book signing, and I saw you had so many of your friends from your local community and your life show up. And as I said to you just a few days ago, if I was in town, I certainly would have been there physically, but I was there with you in spirit, and I watched that day unfold for you. What was it like for you to be in your town where you spent years living, surrounded by friends and family, as an author in your local Barnes and Noble store?
Wow, it was beyond wonderful. Yeah, I mean, I was floored when I saw how many people were there. There was 25 to 30, and then each person that would come in, I would see their face and was like, oh my God, you showed up. You know, it was like, it was so beautiful, because I wasn't really keeping track of like who's coming, who's not. You know, some people would say, I'm definitely going to be there. I'm going to try. And so I just let that go. And I just kept saying, you know, who's ever supposed to be there will be there. And it was just so warm for me and loving to have all that support. I was blown away. And this one guy, Ed, that I haven't seen in a while, and it was so wonderful to see him and give him a hug. And yeah, he had no idea I was a hospice nurse. So and then, you know, the sharings that went on, this woman was sharing about her mom that recently passed. And then my friend in the back, she channels, and her mom came through and she said, your mom is here right now.
Oh
So
my, that's amazing.
it was so amazing, because my friend was
Wow.
like, she felt it so strong, and she felt like she really had to say it. And it was like, and then the woman was like, oh my gosh, she's here. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is this turning out to be? But it was great, you know, because her mom came to her through my friend. And yeah, it was quite a night. Quite a night. It was wonderful.
How has writing a book changed your life?
Oh my gosh. That's a really good question. You know, it's opened up doors that never would have opened up to me. It's allowed me to meet people. It's allowed me to grow. It's allowed me to be vulnerable. That was a biggie, because it was like, oh my God, everybody is now going to know that I smoke pot. You know, it was that kind of thing. Although I really see it as a beautiful medicine, and I use it basically medicinally because it is a beautiful medicine. And I'm so happy that it's legal. And it's just helped me a lot. And through my career too, I thought, oh my God, this medicine should be available for my patients, my hospice patients. And I used to advocate it, but then it wasn't legal at the time, but it might have been medicinally, but hospice couldn't give it. And one of the really cool things that I witnessed was a patient who had the CBD oil. Her son was giving her that. So I'm going to need to plug my computer in because I have low battery, but we can continue on. So this is my beautiful yard, everybody.
It is beautiful. Wow, it's amazing. I was in your backyard one time. I think we were over your house a couple of times, but one time you had Sean Galloway, I believe is his name,
yes.
friend of yours, a musician, and Mary and I, my Mary, the other angel, and I showed up at your house. We were graciously invited and we accepted. But it was at nighttime. It's a very different experience seeing your yard in the nighttime and seeing it during the daytime. So thank you for sharing that with us today. Yeah. So, in your book, I believe it's the last chapter, you actually spend some time talking about medicinal cannabis. And I'd like you just to take maybe perhaps just another minute or two, because we are at the hour, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
And I'd like to respect your time as much as possible. And so we can go over a little bit if you're okay with that, if you have an extra few minutes.
Sure.
But share with me why you felt it was important to actually include a chapter on medicinal cannabis in your book.
Well, I'm a real believer in it. And I've seen it work. I've seen it work in my life and other people's life. I think it's a shame that they villainized it. And I read somewhere like 100 years ago, that was the medicine of choice. And for whatever reason, politics or whatever, I don't like to go into all that, but it became a class 3. It was like, and I believe that God put it here on earth as a healing herb. And that's how I see it. And of course, you can overdo anything and you could get in trouble with anything. If you're not using things right and overdosing, yeah, it may cause problems, but I see a real need for it. I mean, there's so much documentation about the benefits of it, especially with seizures, pain management. So, I'm delighted that it's legal, and my wish is that it becomes legal throughout the U.S. And I think that it can help so many people. It's just the stigma against it. And of course, I was born in the 60s. And so there was all that controversy over it. And, and I'm just so glad to have seen a change.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. I'd like to invite you in a moment to share some closing thoughts. But before we go there, again, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me. This has been a real special show.
Thank you. Thank you.
It has been real special for me because, I know you, I think it's about 8 years. And when you and I met, well, the first time, we met a few times, but the first time we met, I thought I was at my bottom in my own personal journey called life. Unfortunately, I had to get a little sicker than that. And I stepped out of your life for some time. And then we reacquainted 4 years 4 years ago. Actually, it was just under 4 years ago because today is my 4-year anniversary that I stepped out of the hospital and began my healing journey. And so it was the second time around that I met you, and we got to spend some beautiful moments together. I remember the day distinctly. We were together at the beach in Sunset Beach, and you and I had a conversation, and I expressed to you what I felt was the right time for you to finish your book and to release all those fears and self-doubts and just just put it out there that it would make a difference in someone's life. And it wasn't too long thereafter that you actually did finish the book and you hit send, and the rest is history. And your life has changed and it's improved from the experiences of having had the courage to hit send. And so I'm so glad that you took the time to come in and share this space with me today, and have this chance to have this beautiful conversation and share some of your experiences that impacted other people's life and families as they were transitioning. With what time we do have left, Mary, oh, by the way, before we go there, I just also want to say, I was thinking about it, that before I hit my rock bottom and started on my healing journey, I am not aware that there was one woman in my life that had your name.
Hmm.
And today there are at least 5 Marys in my life that have touched my life in a very profound way.
Wow.
And of course, the one that I refer to as my angel, and that's Mary Kelly. But I would like to say in this moment that there is no doubt, Mary Hill, that you too are an angel, because you have touched so many people's lives through your work.
Wow. Thank
And
you.
I thank you for that.
Wow. Thank you, Jay. That's means a lot to me, and I admire you for your journey, for your healing journey, your inspiration to others. I'm just so honored to be your friend.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm going to invite you to close this out.
Okay.
With some thoughts.
Oh, okay. Remember to love one another. Love is the answer. Be kind to one another. Be kind to yourself. Tell your kids you love them. Be real with the people around you. Be authentic. Be of service. We're all here to help one another through this journey. And cosmically, things are crazy right now, but we just need to stay in the light and be love. And the more people that can get into the light and know that we are part of God, and that love is the answer. And, just be love.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for those closing words. And with that, if you joined us live, I want to thank each and every one of you, including Linda Mary Kelly, Robert Stern coming in from somewhere back east, David Amison, Julie Kiss, Lisa Fox, and whomever else has joined us on this live. If you haven't, you're never too late. You're always right on time. Even on replay, you show up when it's your time. It's the right time is in that moment. Thank you so much for supporting the work that I do. And by you showing up, we have a reason to show up each time we hit live, and we show up to do a show like this. Mary Hill, thank you so much for joining us on Real People, Real Stories. If you could stay in the studio just for one moment as we close out the show. We'll catch you next time on Real People, Real Stories, Raw. Thank you.